Welcome to Caregiving Club On Air. This podcast is dedicated to the millions of family caregivers who want wellness tips and self-care solutions, who seek expert advice, and who want news about healthy aging and how to create well home design in our forever homes. I'm Sherri Snelling, a corporate gerontologist, author, and educator, a TV interviewer, host, and news commentator. I'm joining you from Southern California, where our interviews and news take us all across the country to explore the many ways to help you on your caregiving journey and to lift you up here at Caregiving Club On Air. Welcome to Caregiving Club On Air and our July episode, where we're putting a special spotlight on the Olympics and caregiving and Love Your Brain with Adam Pearce. As well, we're celebrating July National Sandwich Generation Month and International Self-Care Day on July 24th. And we're also going to take a look at National Forest Week and how forest bathing helps us heal our stress and calm our anxieties. I'm Sherri Snelling, your host, and we have a really wonderful episode, I think, for you. I want to give you a little backstory on our guest for this episode, Adam Pearce. I was doing some research about, are there any great stories out there about Olympians and caregiving? And I came across Adam's story with his brother, Kevin Pearce. Kevin, of course, was an Olympian snowboarder. And it is a really inspirational, wonderful story that I think you're going to really enjoy that Adam's going to tell us. And I think it also demonstrates the different ways that we walk into our caregiving roles and take our caregiving journeys. We don't often think of siblings caring for siblings, but that's the story that Adam is going to share with us today, along with some really other wonderful things and the wonderful organization and nonprofit he co-founded with his brother called Love Your Brain. So you're going to really enjoy this interview. And then, of course, in Caregiver Wellness news, we're going to celebrate National Sandwich Generation Month. I'll tell you a little bit about who the sandwich generation is, but also some of the recent studies and statistics around financial wellness and resiliency for the sandwich generation. So you want to stay tuned for that. And then, of course, we'll also talk about International Self-Care Day on July 24th. And I've got some tips for you, particularly on how to harness those 4 feel-good hormones for happiness. And then for Welcome Design, I've got something different. Because of National Forest Week, I'm going to give you a multisensory kind of design tips using our 5 senses of how we bring the forest into the home. And then we're going to wrap it all up with our Me Time Monday wellness hack at the end, where we're going to talk about the healing powers of forest bathing and also give you a 1-minute meditation with a forest bathing experience. So it's all packed into this episode. I'm so glad you could join us. And with that, let's go ahead and take a look at our Caregiver Wellness news. So for our Caregiver Wellness news, as I mentioned, July is National Sandwich Generation Month. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that term, the sandwich generation is defined as the group of family caregivers who are caring for both younger children as well as an older loved one, usually a parent, but it can also be maybe a grandparent or a favorite aunt or uncle, simultaneously. So you're kind of sandwiched and squeezed between these 2 generations and their needs, while you're also trying to balance your own needs. And of course, as we know, that's a juggling act where usually we're dropping that ball that says me and not finding the me time that we really need for our own health and wellness. So the studies that have been done, the National Alliance for Caregiving, of course, is one of the leading research organizations that takes a deep dive look at caregiving populations. They have a report on the sandwich generation that was done a couple years ago. We're going to have a link to that on our episode guide page. But they report that about almost a quarter of all caregivers out there are sandwich generation. And I know that I do a lot of work with employers around caregiver education. And we have so many more people now who are certainly entering this sandwich generation where, they've got their kids, but they've also got older loved ones they're caring for. And, there's a little flexibility in the younger generation of that definition, because we used to say it was children under the age of 18, but we also know now that a lot of kids who have maybe gone off to college and then they've come back home, they haven't yet maybe found a job. They're still under mom and dad's roof. They're still, they're not maybe paying rent, not paying the utilities and all the other financial responsibilities. And so there's a real kind of financial strain on the sandwich generation, where the financial resiliency, financial wellness, all that planning really needs to be thought about. Because in our families, of course, with longevity, we know that we've got older parents, grandparents living longer. In my book, I write about there can be potentially 6 to 7 generations alive at the same time. So it's becoming more and more of something that we need to kind of take a look at. And there was a separate study that was done, and I have the notes here, from the University of Michigan on the sandwich generation. And they said that those caregivers were twice as likely to report financial difficulty, not too surprising, and more likely to report substantial emotional difficulty than their caregivers who were just simply caring for an older parent but didn't maybe have that younger generation that they were also taking care of. So, certainly a lot more burden on our sandwich generation. And that's where, I kind of come in. I like to try to help people understand, how do you manage that balance of being between those two generations without losing the focus on self-care and on me time. And, in my book, I do have a whole section. I break down life into 7 elements of wellness, as many of you know. Financial wellness is certainly one of them. And it's something where I think we have to really start having more conversations, of course, as families, to plan ahead for long-term care and the costs of that, because we are still not as educated about the fact of, do these costs get covered? And the answer is typically no. Medicare does not cover long-term care costs. And then what are those costs? What are we looking at? Very often it can be upwards of $360,000 to $500,000 just for 2 to 3 years of care of a loved one. And this is maybe after years of giving them some care and time while they're still living at home. That $360,000 to $500,000 typically relates to if they need to move into memory care, assisted living, and those are out-of-pocket expenses. But maybe years before that, you've also been, performing tasks and responsibilities and taking care of them at home as long as possible, because we know most older adults do want to stay in their homes as long as they can. So it's a real, thing that we need to open our eyes to. Longevity is real. It's here. How do we manage all these multiple generations and kind of help, take care of each other? One thing that I also write about, I'll just really touch on it quickly, but in my book there's something called the grandmother hypothesis, and I won't go into it here. There's science behind it, but in some ways, the sandwich generation can get some help from older parents who can serve as either, babysitters or interacting with the younger generation, and help out a little bit that way, particularly for the sandwich generation that's also juggling a job where they're needing to be, the breadwinner, or bring in the cost for the home, and I'll cover all of those costs. So there's some upsides as well, but it's just something that we need to recognize is happening more and more in our society, as we do have, of course, more older parents that we're going to be caring for over the next few decades. So just really quickly, I will have some links to some articles that I've written about this. In my book, I talk about the conversations that we should be having as families, particularly around long-term care, and then also end-of-life wishes, planning early, so there's no surprises. We don't want to plan in a crisis, right? We want to not wait until the disaster happens. We want to know what we're looking at and where all the resources are, how much have mom and dad save? Do they have long-term care insurance or not? What benefits might they be receiving if they were perhaps military and they get some VA benefits? All those factors play into this. And certainly, I know, again, I work a lot with employers, and employers are really taking a hard look at, okay, the financial resiliency and financial wellness of our employees is important. What maybe should we be looking at to help either guide them, coach them, give them information, and help them if they don't have maybe a planner who can kind of take a look at their picture and say, okay, this is what you should be thinking about. So I think you're going to see some more of that coming from employers, but for the meantime, it's kind of all on us as usual. And we just need to be, mindful of the fact that the financial picture in our lives can really impact our emotional, social, physical, all other aspects of our wellness and our life. And so it's an important piece. Also, just quickly, if you're really interested in financial advisement around caring for older parents and loved ones and really want to understand long-term care, really want to understand what Medicare or Medicaid may cover or not, I've done some really great interviews on this podcast, and I want to do a shout out to Amanda Stahl of Raymond James. She was season 4 this season, episode 35. Also, Cynthia Hutchins of Bank of America, who's done a lot of research again around family caregiving and financial resiliency. She was on season 3, episode 20. And then Cindy Hunsel, who is the goddess and guru of helping women manage retirement and financial planning as we get older. She's the head of a nonprofit called Wiser, which is Women's Institute for Secure Retirement. And she was in season 2, episode 1. I'm going to have links to all of those on the episode guide page, but you may want to check them out. Really great conversations, gives you a lot more in-depth, information. And then I've been doing kind of some free webinars. Not that I want to give away all of my content for free, but I'm going to do a version, a slightly summarized version of my Care Conversation webinar. And I'm going to have that on our YouTube channel. You can watch it on demand. It's kind of how do we start these conversations with older loved ones so that we can get a step ahead on the planning, trajectory for long-term care and all of that. So I'll have a link as well to that on our episode guide page. So moving on now from the sandwich generation needing to practice self-care, July 24th is International Self-Care Day. And I'm really excited. I'm actually going to be doing a great talk at my alma mater, University of Southern California. So it's put on by USC as well as the Los Angeles Family Caregiver Resource Center, and it's open to everyone. It's a free webinar. I'll have a link on our episode guide page, but you may want to join us for that talk because we're going to take a deep dive into a lot of the elements of my book, but particularly these 7 elements, how to find that better balance in life, particularly, again, as we're caregiving and focused on everybody else except for ourselves. So we're going to help you learn how to put the spotlight back on yourself. And so I hope you can join us for that. But, there's also some recent news that I came across, and I wanted to share this with you. Matter Neuroscience. So this is a startup company. They just actually received $26 million in funding. Not too bad from an investor, perspective. And they're looking for biomarkers in the brain for happiness. Now, happiness is like the holy grail of science. There's so many researchers out there right now, so many people focused on, how do we be happier? Unfortunately, Gallup does an annual survey globally, and it's showing that the U.S. is declining a little bit in our happiness, levels, which is not a good trajectory. We want to switch that around. Interestingly enough, if we're talking about the Olympics for this episode, so the countries that always receive the gold, silver, bronze, if you will, in the happiness study that Gallup does are the Scandinavian countries. So Finland, Denmark, Iceland, Norway. Always at the top of the leaderboard. And I write in my book a little bit about, well, why is this? There's something called Blue Wellness, and I will tease you with that so you can read the book, but there is a component of water and kind of that coastal living that plays into this, and that has to do with a lot with our brain health. But there's also some other factors as well, which is really interesting. But the whole point is, everybody is kind of chasing, how do we, use science and other things to figure out how to be happier. Well, one of the things I wrote about in my book, Me Time Monday, the weekly wellness plan to find balance and joy for a busy life, which I always, promote, and I'll have a link on the episode guide page for you. But I talk about the 4 hormones against the apocalypse, and those are the 4 feel-good hormones for happiness, and they are oxytocin. So oxytocin is our love, trust, and bonding hormone. This is really about being socially, fit, social fitness, and making sure that we're socially active and that we're actually experiencing the physical nearness and closeness of others, okay? And creating that kind of bonding hormone, which is so essential to survival. So that's number 1, oxytocin. Number 2 is serotonin. Now, interestingly, serotonin is the only one of these 4 that actually is initiated in your gut. So it's part of your microbiome environment. It doesn't initiate from the brain like the other hormones. It starts in the gut, and it is very tied to appetite. But it's also tied to, it's a mood booster. People who are more depressed have lower serotonin levels. Now, some of the ways you can boost it is through natural, being out in sunshine, being outside, that, vitamin D, which is our sunshine vitamin. You can get that also through foods like salmon and walnuts and other things like that. But serotonin is really about boosting our mood. And it also plays a key role in sleep. So we know how important sleep is to our health. And then we've got endorphins. Now, endorphins are like our body's own natural morphine. It's our pain relief. And it helps us be able to work past certain pains. Sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad, but it certainly helps us overcome, some of that pain that we create. And it's almost like a euphoria. And, you can get this in a lot of different ways: laughter, certainly kissing, sex, all those good things. But, dancing, working out. So the endorphins are what we let loose in our body that actually boost, again, they kind of interface and interact with serotonin and other things that just really boost that happiness factor. And lastly, we've got dopamine, right? Now, dopamine is the reward center or reward hormone of the brain. And it's the place, or the hormone that helps create pleasure and arousal. But interestingly, it's also part of learning. And that makes a lot of sense, right? Because as we go through life, we learn that, that spiky, cactus hurts. Okay, don't touch that again. That's painful. I don't want to do that. I want to go over here and touch something soft, or whatever it is. But it kind of helps us learn the good and bad. Now, what can happen with dopamine is we can go down the wrong path with it, right? We know that the reward of maybe drinking alcohol, doing drugs, gambling, any kind of risky kind of behavior can elicit in some people a dopamine release where then you just have to want it again and again and again and again. And it creates bad addictions. There is a way, obviously, through certain, whether it's cognitive behavioral therapy or other things, that we can harness that dopamine hormone, though, and turn it around and focus it on giving us rewards that are beneficial, both to our physical and our emotional lives. A lot of times it has to do with, again, going back to that social interactions that we have, the physical closeness, feeling like you're part of a tribe, or, you've got a group of people, who you're part of that group. And so those are some of the ways that we can kind of retrain our hormones and really harness them for happiness. Now, the one thing I will say is that so much of this is what we're now talking about in gerontology and in wellness circles, is we need to balance the URL of our life, which is the digital tools, the internet, social media, texting, all of those great tools that we have. But we got to balance that with IRL, which is in real life. Put down the phone, take a look into someone's eyes. That's how you get oxytocin, when you're staring into someone's eyes, when you're giving them a physical hug. It's one thing to send an emoji with the kiss on it, which is one I use all the time. you're not going to get the same effect as actually giving someone a hug. So we've got to balance the URL and IRL in our lives in order to feel that happiness and have more of that joy. And again, this is a big, big, huge part of my book. I write so much more and tell you a lot about the science of how our brains work, how these hormones interact and all that. But I just wanted to share that with you because obviously companies are getting a lot of money to chase happiness. And I'm thinking, $26 million, that doesn't sound too bad. How do I do that? So anyway, so that's for International Self-Care Day. Just some little tips on our 4 feel-good hormones. Now, we're going to go from self-care and caregiving and segue into our featured guest. And as I mentioned at the top, I was doing some research on Olympians. And I came across the story of Adam Pearce and his brother Kevin. Kevin was a snowboarder. He was an Olympian, and he had a really tragic accident. And Adam's going to tell us the story, so I'm not going to take up time with it now. But it was one that really resonated with me because not only is Adam a sibling caregiver, and we don't talk enough about sibling caregivers. We're often talking about caring for older parents and grandparents, or maybe a special needs child, but very often we're walking into caregiving in different ways for friends, for siblings, and I thought that was really touching. So this is a wonderful brother bonding kind of story that you're going to hear. Also, Adam is a man, and we don't talk enough about the men out there who are stepping into caregiving roles. Men now comprise 40% of all primary caregivers, where they're taking on that primary role of caring for a loved one. So I really felt like Adam ticked all the great boxes I was looking for. I just felt so grateful to come across his story. And then I felt, doubly grateful when he agreed to come on to our podcast and tell us all about all of this stuff. But, for those of you who are snowboarders and into extreme sports, you'll know who Kevin Pearce is. Back in, 2007, 2009 era, he was at the top of his game, beating people like you may know, like Shaun White and others. And so he was really on a trajectory to win that, the gold, if you will, in the 2010 Olympics that were held in Park City until this tragic day hit. And from there is where Adam really becomes the hero of the story. And I will do a shout out to Adam because he was actually recognized last year by CNN as one of the CNN heroes, which is so well-deserved and very inspiring. There's also, if you're into it, I'm going to have a link to the foundation, a nonprofit that Adam and his brother Kevin actually created called Love Your Brain, because Kevin suffered a traumatic brain injury. So we're going to talk a lot about that with Adam. But I'm also going to have a link to the HBO documentary on the two of them called The Crash Reel, which is really interesting. And it's a really great documentary that was done. But anyway, just quick statistics before we talk to Adam. 3 million people suffer a traumatic brain injury every year. And that, you don't have to be a snowboarder to get a TBI, and you don't have to play football or box or play hockey. We talk about, concussions and traumatic brain injuries. We know that our war fighters and first responders certainly might be a little bit more at risk, but anybody can have a TBI. We talk a lot about TBIs with older adults who have fallen and maybe hit their head on the way down. So, traumatic brain injuries can be anything from, slight to very severe. We know that we've had people who, have died because they haven't recognized what the signs are of a TBI and how quickly you need to get to emergency and be taken care of, even if you're not really feeling like anything's wrong, but if you're nauseous or whatever it is, it's really serious stuff. So 3 million people a year suffer from this. And the injuries aren't just physical, right? They're also psychosocial, emotional. It's very challenging for the person with the injury because very often you don't look like you're hurt. So people are like, it's kind of like PTSD or anything that has to do with your brain. It's like, well, you look fine, but you're not, and you need help. And then, again, we don't think enough about sibling caregivers. Easter Seals has done some wonderful studies about sibling caregivers and found that 23% of adults assume or will assume the role of primary care provider for a brother or sister who has a disability or a disease. That's a pretty big number. And so again, as we live longer and maybe, we lose people in their life, or we make a decision that we're going to be solo agers and we don't have a partner, very often it's going to be our siblings who will help care for us or will help care for them or whatever. So again, Love Your Brain is the nonprofit that came out of all of this, showing us there's always silver linings to everything that seems bad. We can find the rainbow after the rain. And the Love Your Brain Foundation has helped over 35,000 people improve their quality of life. They have a variety of programs. You can sign up, and we're going to tell you how to do that. The next one, and they focus on caregivers as well as the people with the TBI, which I love, because often we're focused on the person with the disease or the disability. We overlook the caregivers who also need some help. Not so with Love Your Brain. Adam has done a wonderful job, and we'll have a link to his talk about how they help caregivers. And then you can sign up maybe for some of the next sessions. They use a lot of holistic, kind of medicine and holistic healing to help people through, the challenges that they're finding in life. So without further ado, here is my wonderful interview with our guest for this episode, Adam Pearce. So, as most of you know, the Olympics are just right around the corner. They're coming up in Paris, and it's always an exciting time to watch all the sporting events. And as I was getting ready to look for different interviews for you for our podcast, I was thinking, is there a story out there about an Olympian and maybe a caregiver that I could bring to you? And as I did my research, I came across this wonderful, wonderful story that we're going to bring to you today. And it is the story of Adam Pearce and his brother Kevin, who was an Olympian snowboarder, and Adam's journey as his caregiver. So, Adam, welcome to Caregiving Club On Air.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Well, as I said, I was really inspired by your story as I was doing my research on this niche kind of story I was looking for. I came across your website, which is called Love Your Brain, which you're the co-founder of. And I just felt like this was perfect because it tells the story not only of your brother and his triumphs in his Olympic sport and pursuing that sport, but also what you went through as a caregiver for him. So I want to just go back a little bit and have you start with telling us the story of you and Kevin growing up in Vermont and then his journey to becoming Olympian and your role in all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, we grew up in Vermont, and if you know Vermont, there's a lot of forest and fields, and basically, nature was our playground growing up. We didn't have TV in our house, so we were outside all the time. And I think what came from that was like our desire to find ways to be creative with, yeah, being in nature, and that ended up becoming a profound love for being in the mountains and snowboarding. And we're dyslexic growing up, so school was never a place where we were necessarily thriving. But when we found the kind of limitless possibilities in the mountains, snowboarding provided this kind of very creative outlet for us, which ended up becoming a pursuit in our careers that was really the kind of stepping stone of where Kevin's aspirations led to, and really where his accident actually happened from.
Well, and for people who are, really in tune with the snowboarding world and, some of the extreme sports and things, your brother really was a superstar. There is a wonderful documentary called The Crash Reel, and I recommend our listeners to go ahead and take a look at that. It's a really wonderful documentary that talks about your story and your brother's story. And he was really coming right up on the heels of Shaun White. I mean, Shaun White, probably a lot of people know, but Kevin Pearce was right there with him. So, but unfortunately, on December 31st, last day of the year, 2009, right before the Vancouver Olympics, there was a tragic accident. Tell us about that day and just kind of your process of going through the emotions of what happened with your brother.
Yeah, it was quite a devastating day. As you mentioned, it was on New Year's, and Kevin was just coming off a year where he had won pretty much every contest around the world he entered. He had kind of beaten Shaun leading into the Olympics, so he became kind of this favorite to what we all thought he was going to go to the Olympics and win. And that ended in a training accident when he sustained a traumatic brain injury in Park City, in one of the practices that was leading up to the Olympics. So yeah, as you can imagine, I got a call from a friend who was actually at the half pipe, and he was just in tears, basically saying, you need to get here. And then he didn't really know the extent of how severe it was. And then, he called me back maybe 20 minutes later. He was like, no, like this is really serious. You need to be here. And then that, resulted in our family getting on a flight immediately, and basically arriving at the University of Utah Hospital, and seeing him just, essentially he looked dead, and he had about 30 tubes in his body, and there was really so much uncertainty of if he was going to live and what was going to happen from there.
So tell us about the next few months, because I know he went through, extensive rehabilitation, really learning to do everything again, to walk, to talk, and you were right there every step of the way. In fact, there was a quote that I read in one of the articles that I researched about the two of you, and his quote was, I think it may have been when he was on the Today Show, and he said that basically Adam brought me back to life, which I thought was just so heartwarming and wonderful. But tell us how you stepped into that role of caregiver, and what your days then started to be to care for Kevin.
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, just the early days of childhood. I'm one of four boys, and Kevin and I became kind of inseparable, in our pursuit of snowboarding and just our friendship. So when he got hurt, it people often ask me, was that a hard decision to kind of quit my job and work with him for a year? And I always say, like, it never felt like a question I had to ask myself. There was just a knowing that there was nothing more important than, being there for him and supporting him in whatever kind of unfolded in his healing process. So it was obviously a really difficult time because he was in a coma for a couple of weeks, and we again didn't know if he was going to live. And then just the progress was super, super slow. We were in inpatient in critical care for a month, and in acute care for another 2 weeks, and then we went into inpatient at Craig Hospital for another 3 months, and then it just continued to be a really slow process. But I continuously look back and just I think what was so clear to me is that we were just so in the moment of, like, what can we do in this moment to make things as good as they can be. It wasn't about trying to forecast what the future was going to look like, but I just feel so grateful to my parents and the people around us that just helped continuously put us in a place that said, this is a moment to moment experience, and we're going to be there to really just be as supportive as we can to him, even if he might not know we're there.
Well, and both of you were so young. You were in your 20s, I think, both of you. And, very often when we talk about family caregivers, we think about probably caring for older parents, or maybe our in-laws, certainly maybe grandparents as they get older. We don't often think that we might have to care for a sibling. And it was just, boom, all of a sudden you're thrust into that role. Tell us a little bit about, you said you didn't, it didn't really, wasn't a burden on you. It was something you wanted to do and take that time off from your job. But as you progressed throughout that year of caring for Kevin, what were the emotions and things that you were going through?
Oh, the whole spectrum. I think when you see the person you look up to, the person you love, the person I admire, that when you see them not being able to do the most basic, simple things, your heart just is broken for them. But I think what, we were just focused on, and me specifically, was just like, what are the smallest improvements we can be excited about each day, each session of therapy, and how can I bring the competitive spirit that we had growing up just into that process of healing for him, and how can we make the most, basic games fun or competitive. And I think just the nature of that allowed us to find humor, or find kind of a desire to continue to work in that process, where we could both just kind of push each other in that space.
Well, what I love about this story is that, you of course gave up this year to care for your brother, but it really led to this opening up this door to kind of this whole other journey that you've been taking in starting Love Your Brain, which is a wonderful nonprofit that I want to have you tell us about. But, you co-founded that. And so much of what you're talking about right now is built into the programs. And so tell us a little bit about what Love Your Brain is all about. And, particularly things like I love that you focus on resiliency. And I think that when you're an athlete, you have a natural kind of resilience, right? To pain, to fear, to a lot of things that, normal people might not do. But the resiliency of being able to come through a health event or to go through caregiving and be resilient and be hopeful is really a powerful message. But tell us a little bit about Love Your Brain.
Absolutely. Well, I think you just touched on it. I mean, it's about being resilient. I don't think there's anyone who goes through this kind of experience who isn't resilient. And I think when we kind of took a step back in after we did the crash reel and after so many people were coming to us asking, what is Kevin doing? What can I do? How can you support? I think what we looked at was like, well, what is making Kevin resilient day in and day out, continuing to fight and continuing to see improvements and just, yeah, a willingness to continue to meet every challenge with informed optimism. And I think we look at that as a synergy between awareness and hope. And I think when we can look at each experience like that, it just continues to feel like there's possibility. And yeah, I feel like we were actually giving a talk and a doctor asked Kevin, what makes you so resilient? And he kind of stood there and looked at me and was like, I don't know. And from that moment, there was this kind of curiosity of like, well, what is it actually? And so many people coming to us, with really this message of feeling isolated and a lack of hope. And so we really spent a few years trying to understand what is that? What makes people resilient? What was giving Kevin this resilience? What was our family doing to have resilience? And that kind of led to research and led to us really understanding what makes people resilient and how can we create programs that ultimately do that for people who are going through that.
And so tell us about some of the programs that your organization offers. And what I love is, again, you're offering these programs for people like Kevin who have gone through traumatic brain injury or other issues, perhaps, in their lives, physical, ailments and other things. And then you also have robust programs for the family caregiver, which I love that balance between those two. But tell us about these programs and how you're offering this to your audience.
Yeah, so we take a very holistic approach. I think one thing that was very clear is that when you injure your brain, you injure the whole human experience, physically, socially, emotionally. And I think was very clear from Kevin's experience is that you have to bring them all together. And because physical and emotional things are challenged, mind-body connection is also kind of separated. So when we found actually the modality of yoga and meditation, it's this place where it allows people to connect kind of to their experience, but through a physical and emotional experience together and a social one. So those are really the kind of foundations of how we've designed each of our programs. And yeah, you can see them on loveyourbrain.com, the variation of programs, but it's really about bringing people with shared experiences together and helping them tap into resources that can support different aspects of their healing through either physical or social or emotional challenges.
Right. And again, you really have been thoughtful, I think, and mindful about the way you've put the programs together because people can watch them on demand. They can join an online, interactive community and chat and workshops and things. And then also there's the in-person activity. So you've really kind of offered it for wherever people are, you meet them with these kinds of healing practices. How did you come about that? I mean, what was the thought process in putting this together?
Well, as you just named, I mean, I think accessibility is a key cornerstone to everything we think about, because we know brain injury is every brain injury is so different, and people's needs I think needs are different. So one thing we really paid attention to was given that, how can we create programs that try to knock down all the barriers that are there. So we think about that from physically, if people have physical challenges, how can we support that specifically? And we do that. We partner with some of the best neuro rehabilitation centers in the country and have them adapt certain dimensions of our curriculum so that people with more physical early challenges are being supported in that phase. And then really the big emphasis is, once you leave an inpatient medical center, then there's really a bridge to care afterwards. And that's really where we felt the drop off of care happens. So ensuring that when you do go home and you're, depending on where you are, there's always a way for you to access what our programs are. So if that's just through an online support kind of program, or as you mentioned, coming to one of the in-person retreats, we try to do our best at making it accessible for people's needs.
Yeah, and I think that's just so wonderful. And again, offering it to them in a way that works for them, but also recognizing. I love that, so often when I talk to different nonprofits and charities and such, they're focused more on the person with the disease or the disability, and maybe not as much on the person caring for them.
Mm.
And we know that journey is also very special and also has a lot of needs. I do so much work with caregivers, and I often hear the phrase, "I feel all alone." You obviously had a very tight-knit family circle, but what would be your message to family caregivers out there who are feeling like, you know, I've really abandoned myself, or I do feel alone in doing this and no one really recognizes, kind of what I'm going through? What would be your message to them?
Come to a Love Your Brain caregiver program. No, I think well, yes, that, and I just feel like, everything you just mentioned is so part of the experience. With brain injury, it's not just the individual who gets impacted, it's the entire network, the family, the infrastructure around them. So it is, as in my experience, it felt as critical for Kevin to do the therapy and the rehabilitation. I also needed to do my own work. Something that I became very clearly attuned to was this idea of ambiguous grief. Often if we lose someone, there's kind of a close, like something closes in that, and you can kind of work to process that. But with brain injury, there is this sense of losing someone, but it also changes and continues to morph into different dynamics. And I think part of the caregiving process, it requires us to get in tune to how we as caregivers relate to that change, and how we relate to acceptance or expectation, or all of these things that are essential in the caregiving dynamic. But one often that, as caregivers, there's not space, because we have to kind of jump in, and lives are upended or challenged, and that's kind of where we have to be. But I think as people move through that process, I just continuously saw the need of creating these spaces where caregivers could feel like they were being supported in that process as well.
Which I really love. And one of the things that struck me when I went to your website, which is beautifully done, is there was this sense of, again, nature. And, you have kind of the forest. There's a photo, I think, of you and Kevin in the forest. And, it goes back to your beginnings and your roots in Vermont. But as a gerontologist and someone who studied a lot of neuroscience, it taps into also that ancient brain part of us that thrives in nature. That we really do seek that. And so I felt like you brought that in, even if all of your events are not in person. I feel like there's a fusion of nature in kind of what you're doing. But tell us, am I right on that? Am I tracking with that?
I mean, absolutely. And I think there's probably science totally that proves that. But I think even when you just tap into your own experience and feelings, I think anytime I go for a walk or into the woods or on a hike, I mean, I can instantly see the difference in just how I'm feeling. And I think there is a dimension of healing that absolutely happens when you put yourself in those spaces. So yeah, we've always tried to, if it's an in-person or even if it's online, we're always trying to create space where that connection's happening, because I believe it facilitates, yeah, a dimension of healing that's really important.
So tell us, how is Kevin doing now?
Yes, it's always a question that I pause with, because the process of healing after TBI, we don't look at as like, um, I guess the way that Love Your Brain really tries to harness that question is, it's not about outcome necessarily focused. Like, it's not like he's good or he's great. I think with TBI, it's about integration. So it's, how do you integrate this new you into this world now that you're living with? So I think it's for Kevin, there's continuously that process of, where does he find ways of continuously enhancing his well-being with the different dimensions or of the challenges that he's dealing with. And he's been remarkable in that. He has a beautiful family, and yeah, I think is thriving in so many dimensions of his life, and I think continues to find ways of continuously trying to work on himself to heal and yeah, and be better.
How are you doing?
I would say it's very similar in terms of, I don't think the work ever stops. I really believe in, this is a practice, and one that the more committed you are, the more reward happens. And I think my lesson in this has, what traumatic brain injury has meant to me is to turn boldly inward. And it's really it was actually a year after, 2 years after, or a year and a half after Kevin got hurt, where I ended up going to India and doing a 10-day silent Vipassana meditation. And it was a transformative moment in not only my healing, but in my ability to see myself as a caregiver, and to see how much of um, the result of I was placing so much blame towards Kevin in terms of where our challenges were. And it wasn't until I really started to quiet my mind and really connect into my heart that I started to actually see that the challenges were a result of my issues, my inability to accept who he was, or my inability to create expectations that uh, were reasonable for him to kind of agree to and meet. And I just feel like ever since then, there has been just such a commitment and a practice of mine to see how important it is for us to like to be more mindful, to be more in tune with how and what we're reacting to, why we're reacting in those ways, and to examine those and look at those and get curious about those. Because I think in any dynamic, it requires both people to be able to have some self-awareness and self-inquiry to understand what they can be doing or what they need to change in order for that relationship to thrive. So
Well,
I would say, yeah, I'm in a really great place, but it doesn't mean that challenges don't exist and work doesn't continue.
right. And it is a journey. So often we're always focused on, as you mentioned, the destination or the outcome, and we don't pause and take a moment for just the journey to happen. And I love that message about calming your mind and looking into your heart. I think that's such a powerful, inspiring message for family caregivers. One quick last question. When we talk about caregivers and we want to reach them, right, with all these good resources and information, but most family members don't identify as a caregiver. We often think that's the nurse practitioner, the home health aide, or whomever. We don't call ourselves caregivers. Did you find yourself resonating with that word, or was it only kind of afterwards that you realized, gosh, yeah, I was a caregiver for my brother?
It's such a great question. It has, and it's taken on. I've continuously looked for a different word, because I think in early days, I feel like where he had like really no abilities, I felt that sense of caregiving. But as his healing progressed, our dynamic really changed, and it wasn't me, you know, having to do all the things for him. It was more of, it was just an evolution of what there were aspects of that, but it just changed. And I think it's really important, as whatever that term is, that I see it more as just like a care partnership, because I think the reality is, as much as you give, you're also receiving. And it's really important to understand that, because I think you can, you only have so much to give if you don't feel like you're receiving. But I feel like when you create the space to really look at that and understand what you are receiving, it just can open up a huge amount of space to even give more, or give in different ways, and support in a dimension that's healthier as things change in the dynamic.
I love that. And that's a great thought to kind of end our conversation on. I wish we could talk all day, because I'm so fascinated by your programs, and particularly your journey that you said, to find kind of that space of mindfulness and all of that. But tell us where our listeners can find the programs and all the wonderful work that you're doing at Love Your Brain.
Yeah, if you go to loveyourbrain.com, you will see everything there. We have programs that are just for caregivers. So we have a retreat in January that is just caregiver focused. We also, our community-based programs allow people with brain injury and the caregivers to go together, which is also a really profound experience. We have a mindset program that's an online program for just caregivers, actually, that will be happening in October. So a lot of opportunities. And depending where you are in that process as a caregiver, we're really intentional about trying to match you to the experiences that can be most supportive where you are.
Great. And just so our listeners know, you do have to sign up and register. So we want to make sure. So I think the registration for the caregiver retreat starts in September. Are there any other upcoming deadlines that we should make listeners aware of, or?
Yeah, the best thing to do is just sign up for our newsletter, because that's the place where we always update about upcoming programs and timelines. Our programs do tend to fill up, and it's just important that if you're on our newsletter, you're always the first to receive the news of when they are and where they're happening.
Well, that's great. Well, again, we're going to be promoting your programs. I just really love what you're doing. And I just want to thank you so much. And, God bless to you and your family, and to Kevin, and particularly for you in doing this. So often we go through the experience of caregiving, but now you're giving back. You're kind of teaching us what you learned. And I think that's a really wonderful kind of circle of care that we have in the caregiving community. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I just have such a deep, profound respect and admiration for all of those people who are caregiving, and really, supporting those they love, or those that are just in their lives. So thank you for the work you're doing in helping spread that important message.
Thank you for being our very special guest on this Olympic caregiving episode. I was really thrilled to find your story, you and your brother, and really appreciate you sharing that with our listeners today.
Thanks so much.
Wasn't that a great conversation with Adam? He just, that's such a beautiful story. And even talking to him, he's very kind of zen when he talks, and it makes you feel calm. But we'll have all the links to Love Your Brain on our episode guide page, so you guys can sign up for their newsletter, sign up for the different programs that they have. As he mentioned, there's on-demand, online content. There's also online interactive, and then there's in-person stuff they're doing. So they're doing all of it. And it's just a really, really great organization. And, you guys know, I'm such a brain health neuroscience nerd. How could I find Olympics, caregiving, and Love Your Brain all in one story? It was just the perfect thing for this episode. So now let's turn to Well Home Design news. And as I mentioned, National Forest Week is July 8th through the 14th, 8th through the 14th. And, forest bathing is something that I write about in my book, Me Time Monday. And it really is now, it's also known as forest medicine. So there's a lot of scientific health benefits behind forest bathing. It, in more modern times, has originated from Japan, and it's called Shinrin Yoku. And I write about Dr. Lee, who's really kind of the father of forest bathing and forest medicine. There's a lot of science that has shown that it definitely helps with our sleep. We actually sleep better when we have done a hike in the woods or among, a place with a lot of trees. We know that the chlorophyll that it emanates from the trees helps oxygenate our lungs. This is one of the reasons why Central Park in New York City made sure that they had 290,000 trees that they planted in that park for the oxygenation, the air care, if you will, of the lungs of the people of New York City. And it's something we can also think about bringing into the home. Forest bathing also boosts our natural killer cells, which are the white blood cells that really attack the viruses and the tumors in our body. It's used a lot in immunotherapy and other cancer treatments. And so really trees become our lifesavers. So if you can't get to a forest, and by the way, we're going to have links to places where you can go across the U.S. to find good paths in great forests. I also want to do a quick shout out because there's a great story. I'm going to have a link to it on the episode guide page, but there's a young woman in Atlanta, Amy Copeland. She had a horrific flesh-eating bacteria that actually made it so they had to amputate some of her limbs. She was a great hiker and, athlete and had been outside a lot. And obviously, after she recovered, she was in a wheelchair, but she found it really difficult. You can't really navigate a forest path with a wheelchair. So these track chairs, which they've used very often in the veteran community to make sure that vets can still get out, and do some hiking and be outdoors the way they want to be outdoors. And so these all-terrain kind of vehicles that are kind of souped up and specially made for people with, paraplegia or disabilities, they aren't inexpensive. And so a lot of nonprofits are putting funding together. Amy actually came up with her own foundation to help fund these for some of the national parks in and around Atlanta. So shout out to her and her husband. But they're really wonderful. And again, it helps our community of people who still want to thrive in life, who still want to find that happiness in the forest and do the forest bathing that we should all be enjoying. And not having the accessibility be a barrier. So shout out to the people who create these chairs and also the foundations and organizations and nonprofits and stuff that help fund them. So what I do for Well Home Design News, which is what we're focused on here, is I want to take our five senses, because when you do forest bathing, if you haven't done that experience, by the way, it's really great. You're immersing your five senses, sight, smell, sound, taste, touch. You're immersing yourself in your five senses when you do forest bathing. And it's very meditative and it's very calming and it's very healing. How do you bring that into the home? So I wanted to break it down by the five senses and give you some little thoughts. It certainly isn't the same. We're not going to plant a whole bunch of pine trees in your living room, but it's not going to be exactly the same as a forest bathing experience, but it'll give you a sense and trigger in your brain the connection that we make when we see or smell or even touch or taste something that is related to the forest. And it gives us that little boost, again, a little boost of happiness. So here are some ideas. First of all, sight. Okay. Artwork that has, beautiful forests, beautiful trees is certainly helpful. There's something else that I've seen a lot of people doing, and that is taking the peel and stick wallpaper. Okay. So it's really easy to do, and putting these huge murals in a meditation room, a workout room, their bedroom. Maybe it's a small space where I always love reading nooks. I've written about the reading nook and getting kind of your little sanctuary space. Putting up an actual mural of the forest. I'm going to have some images on the episode guide page that you guys can check out. That is certainly going to be a trigger to the brain of, being in that kind of foresty environment. Also photo books, beautiful coffee table books, or even maybe it's a photo album of your experiences, in the forest and hiking and all that. Just being able to kind of sit and look through those, take a few minutes, take a break, a me time break, look through that. And then green paint. Now, this is interesting. I've written about this before because it's part of biophilic design, by the way, all of this is. And I've written about the fact that green is the color that our eyes see the longest as we get older. So it's in the middle of the color spectrum, which is why we do see it the longest. But it's also, it connotes living, thriving, fertility, new things. So it's a very optimistic color for people who are older. We often default to kind of the blues, which are calming and all that, but the green is invigorating. It can also be calming. I write a lot about color psychology in my book, Me Time Monday, so you can delve into green color psychology. But I'm also going to have a link to a couple articles I've written about biophilic design and specifically the green, the power of green. But think about green paint. Maybe just painting a room in green or something. Those types of things can actually really help as well, because again, it's just giving you that sense, that color psychology of being in a place that is thriving and is invigorating. So moving on from sight to sound, I'm going to create a playlist for you. Haven't done it yet, and I promise I'll get it done. I'm going to create a playlist of songs. I got kind of crazy creative the other day and started looking up songs that had the word forest or woods or willow trees and things. And it's pretty interesting, actually, a little exercise. I came across some really great music. And so I want to share that with you. So I'm going to see if I'm going to get myself to create maybe a Spotify playlist, or at the very least, I'll have a list and links to you can watch these music videos and stuff on YouTube. But I'm going to have the playlist for you. But also sound machines. I've talked a lot about sonic hues in terms of sleep science, and we know pink noise is the most optimum sonic hue to help us get to sleep and stay asleep. Green noise is probably second. Both of those, pink noise and green noise, simulate nature sounds. The green noise is going to be a little bit more with a little bit deeper tone in it, whereas the pink is a little softer. But having those nature sounds, my favorites, by the way, on my sleep machine are the light raindrops on the forest leaves. I use that one a lot, and then also the soft waves on the beach, because I'm a coastal girl and a beach girl. But think about that in terms of your sleep science, bringing the forest in through those sounds. You can also do meditation, a forest bathing type meditation. There's a lot of videos on YouTube where it's a few minutes up to 3 hours, and you can listen to the sounds of the forest, the bird song, again, kind of the dew, from the leaves, the crunching under your feet of the branches and things like that. It's a very soothing kind of meditation. So we'll have all those kinds of sound links. And then, of course, our Me Time Monday wellness hack at the end, we talk about forest bathing and the science of healing, behind forest bathing. But also at the very, very end, stay tuned, because we have a 1-minute meditation for you of our forest bathing that we created for you. It's just a quick 1-minute meditation, but I just thought it'd be kind of cool. And you can just kind of sit there, close your eyes, and you can also replay it for as many minutes as you want. Moving on to smell, aromatherapy. Pine scents and aromatherapy are cleansing. They're invigorating. They are also help with fatigue and cognition. We talk so much about cognition these days and brain health in terms of being able to have our brains function properly. Well, pine scent can really help with that. It's also an anti-inflammatory. Now, I have a scent that I use in my bedroom. Throughout my house, I do a little aromatherapy. So just so you know, my favorite candle, I don't use diffusers a lot, but I know people like diffusers rather than candles because they're a little safer, obviously. But my favorite candle is from Diptyque. It's called Figure, and it is the fig tree. It is the Mediterranean in a bottle. It's just I love it. I have that throughout my house. Then in my bedroom at night, I use a pine and lavender scent together. The lavender, of course, is going to be calming and get us into kind of that sleep zone, but the cleansing of the pine I really like as well. So I sprayed that on my pillows and my sheets. And then, of course, in my closet, I wish, and maybe my dream will come true, and I'll be able to build myself a cedar closet. For those of you who have one, it's my dream, but they're a little expensive. So I fake it with a cedar spray. And I spray that in the closet. And again, it just makes everything smell so fabulous. And then I'll put the little cedar wooden balls or little wood blocks into my sweater drawers and into my, wool coat pockets and stuff when I store things or put them in the closet. And it just smells really, really wonderful. Moving on to taste. Cedar planks. When usually you use them to cook salmon. It's fantastic. Now you can cook other foods as well, other fish, chicken, whatever. The cedar and the salmon seem to go together so well. So that's something to think about. If you haven't used these cedar planks, they're not too expensive and they're really not hard to use, on a grill or whatever. So check that out. The scent and the smell is just fantastic. And of course, salmon is very good for you. It's omega-3, again, it's going to give you that Mediterranean diet, which is good, mind diet. And then pine nuts. Now, you may not know, of course, the nuts that come from pine cones. They're the basic ingredient in pesto sauce, which I love. And we often think that pesto sauce and pine nuts are very high in fat, but they're high in the good fat. So you don't want to eat, handfuls of these pine nuts every day, but a few pine nuts can actually help stabilize blood sugar. So it's great for people with diabetes. It helps build up the protein so that you can help with building your muscle strength. It's an antioxidant, includes a lot of vitamin E, which is really great for your skin. And then it also helps with cardiovascular health. And in fact, the research is showing that 3 servings of pine nuts a week will actually reduce your risk of heart attack. So pine nuts are awesome in a lot of ways, and they just taste so good. And then finally, touch. Maybe one of the hardest things, putting a tree in your living room. Like I said, hey, why not, right? I've seen that done on HGTV. But, maybe you put a little pine cone on your desk and you can kind of play with it a little bit. Maybe you find little mini pine trees. I'm going to have some links on the episode guide page, mini pine trees that I found that are adorable, and they're really great gifts too. And you can put it in a wooden planter so it looks like a little tree on your desk. Or, even again, doing a living wall. Maybe you've got a living wall of all small little pine trees, and it just kind of gives you that forest sense. Or just using forest green, it's a throw or a pillow, something softer to the touch. But again, it's kind of connecting you to that foresty green that our brains are really enthused with and, really helps with that happiness factor. So those are just some tips and ideas. I thought that'd be fun. Again, I'll have images and links on the episode guide page. And so now, sticking with our National Forest Week theme, let's go to our Me Time Monday Wellness Hack, where I'm going to tell you more of the science behind the health and healing of forest bathing. And then we'll also offer you that 1 minute of forest bathing meditation. And that's our little gift to you for the Sandwich Generation and International Self-Care Day and National Forest Week. Welcome to our Me Time Monday Wellness Hack. This episode, we focus on the healing power of forest bathing from the research in my book, Me Time Monday. The Enchanted Forest. Forest bathing has gained a lot of attention in the last few years, mostly because of the wellness movement of being in and experiencing nature. But forest bathing is not new. Forest bathing was officially launched in 1982 in Japan as a national health program called Shinrin Yoku, which translated means luxuriating in the trees. The physical and mental benefits are so evident that the Japanese government has invested over $4 million every year into funding forest therapy research since 2004. Japan also now has 48 official forest therapy trails all over the country, visited by more than 2 million people a year. This therapeutic effect has given rise to what is being called forest medicine. What is unique about forest bathing versus other types of calming exercises and meditation is that it is an immersive experience. During physical exercise or other types of meditation, we are concentrating on our movements or our breathing. Forest bathing is all about focusing on your environment with your 5 senses of sound, sight, smell, touch, and yes, even taste. Forest bathing is truly a multisensory, immersive experience. Breathe. Another health benefit of forest bathing is being in fresh air. In fact, trees are life-giving. They provide vital oxygen and remove harmful gases such as carbon dioxide to make the air we breathe healthier. Here's how it works. A tree uses a process called photosynthesis, where the tree leaves pull in carbon dioxide and water to convert them into chemical compounds that feed the tree. But during this process, the tree also emits a chemical reaction that produces oxygen while also emitting oils that protect it from germs and certain insects. Being in nature, and specifically around trees, gives us the same benefit. We breathe in more oxygen and healthy air. And the phytosanitides created help our immune systems and reduce stress. And of course, during the evolution of human beings, trees offered protection from frightening hunters and shaded us from being in too much sunlight. So in our ancient brains, trees are a place for comfort and safety. So you could say trees are lifesavers. Resilience. About 85% of the U.S. population lives in suburban and urban areas and may not have access to traditional rural forests. In gerontology, we call this nature deficit disorder. Studies show people suffering from nature deficit disorder are more anxious and have less resiliency. Most caregivers are at times overwhelmed by all the responsibilities they are managing. Having to focus on work, home life, and their loved one they are caring for leaves far too little me time. In addition to the physical fatigue, there is the emotional fatigue. The worry and anxiety, sadness, frustrations, and guilt are all part of the caregiving journey. Getting even 5 minutes outside, whether it is a nearby park, the neighborhood, or even stepping into your front or backyard, is vital to not just our physical health, but also our emotional health. It is a healing, calming wellness hack. The immersive experience allows us to revert back to our ancient brains when we felt comforted and secure in forests and nature. And using the 5 senses helps reset our focus. People who practice even a few minutes of forest bathing a week are less stressed and more patient. That is why forest bathing clubs are now on the rise, with more than 2.5 million people a year practicing forest bathing. And being in or even gazing upon nature is not just for family caregivers, but also for the loved ones for which you care. Scientific studies have shown that hospital patients who had a green view onto trees or plant life instead of staring at walls or hospital machinery required less pain medication and recovered faster. Midnight in the Oasis. Beyond the stress relief and the healing effects, forest bathing can also help with sleep. A researcher at Nippon Medical School in Tokyo conducted a study on the health benefits of forest bathing. After 2 hours of forest bathing walks, he observed the average sleep time of participants increased by 15%, which translates into 54 more minutes of sleep per night. The participants were also less anxious and scored more positively on a generalized anxiety survey. And the quality of sleep was better, with more restful hours per night. Feel the calm. Our brains crave nature, whether it is being in a forest or gazing upon a beautiful green space with plants and trees. We help heal the stress in our bodies and boost our emotional health. John Muir, who was the founder of the Sierra Club and known as the father of America's national parks, said, "Nature in her green, tranquil woods heals and soothes all afflictions." For the next minute, we bring you a glimpse into forest bathing. As you listen to the sounds of the forest and the soft music, take this moment and close your eyes. Picture yourself in a beautiful forest full of trees. Hear the bird song, the light rainfall on the leaves and the ground, a tiny crackle of twigs as you walk through your enchanting forest. Smell the air, breathe deeply, and feel the calm. Mm-hmm. We hope you enjoyed this Me Time Monday wellness hack. Each episode of our Caregiving Club On Air podcast features a new Me Time Monday wellness hack, and you can find these and more in my new book, Me Time Monday, the weekly wellness plan to find balance and joy for a busy life, or visit metimemonday.com or caregivingclub.com. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Caregiving Club On Air. Please hit the subscribe button to listen to us on our listening channels, Amazon Music, SiriusXM, iHeartRadio, Pandora, as well as Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts, as well as other listening channels. Check out all the resources and article links on our episode guide page at caregivingclub.com. Just hit the podcast tab at the top and email us with comments and questions at podcast@caregivingclub.com. Thank you again for listening. Take care and stay well.